Thank you.
So good afternoon. This is Subrakant Panda, immediate past president FICCI, and on my left is Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, past president FICCI. We have just witnessed the interim budget which was presented by the Honorable Finance Minister. I think it was a very strong, confident, deep dive into the state of affairs of the Indian economy and all that the government has done in the last decade or so. What stood out for me was the clear articulation that the focus groups on which the government is working on for upliftment and development are the poor, the women, the youth, and the farmers. There is a clear emphasis on green growth and inclusive growth. In as much as green growth is concerned, initiatives such as the viability gap funding for offshore wind, as well as a focus on the EV ecosystem, I think stood out. Clearly, the government is maintaining or giving a directionality in terms of a continued focus on capex outlay, with a 11.1% increase for FY25 to a record 11.11 lakh crore rupees. While at the same time, there is an acknowledgement that private sector capex is picking up, and therefore, especially aided by resurgent growth, the government is estimating lower borrowing, which will free up the space for the private sector, which, as I said, again, keeping in mind the private sector investment which is taking place, I think is a necessary step. That apart, there is also a strong focus on reforms at the state level for Viksit Bharat, with a 75,000 crore outlay linked to milestone-based reforms. Of course, from my point of view, what I was particularly happy to listen to is the clear articulation of Eastern India as a driver of growth. I think in terms of the state of affairs of the Indian economy, what stands out is the strong growth momentum and the formalization of the economy, with the fiscal deficit for FY24 now projected to be 5.8%, which is better than the 5.9% which was initially projected. And the fiscal deficit for FY25 is now expected to be 5.1%. So clearly there is, there is strong momentum, growth momentum. Buoyant tax receipts have aided that, and that is a reflection on how well the Indian economy is doing. While there is certainly support for those at the bottom of the pyramid, which is absolutely essentially, and as FICCI we support that, but there is no deviation from the fiscal glide path, and that I think is praiseworthy. So, Naina, if you could add to that, please.
So I think I would just endorse that statement on the FISC. It is indeed extremely laudatory that not only has there been a commitment to what we thought was going to be 5.3%, but it's been lowered to 5.1% for the coming year, which is, I think, in part because of the confidence the government has in terms of collections, but also to maintain this rigor, that too in an election year, is really very laudatory. Meanwhile, it's happening without cutting back on what has been an amazing capex program by the government. As Subrakant mentioned, there's an increase in the capex. There was specific mention of economic corridors. The words logistics came up several times in our finance minister's speech. And that is something which industry across the board looks for, as logistic costs in the country have to come down. There was mention of ports. There's mention of increased and continued investment in airports. And I do believe that this is very clear as part of that capex program. I think maybe just to add to that, and it plays into some of the messages around rail spending, bogies being converted into Vande Bharat bogies, etc., is tourism. Tourism for the middle class got mentioned, and the spiritual tourism came up. So there's I think in there, the desire to grow our tourism infrastructure, which I do believe is, again, a very significant step. Many countries, we know in Europe, survive on tourism. We as a country have so much to offer. And as we invest in this infrastructure for tourism and domestic tourism itself, I do believe has got mentioned. Much of this will fall to the states, and the way the continued support to the states and the state program, which has also been mentioned, I hope will also end with some of the investment in the tourism sector. I would just add that on women-centric programs, there was, again, mention of some of the programs that have indeed already been in play. A specific mention of continued support to the self-help group movement in the country, which with 83 lakh self-help groups, 9 crore women beneficiaries, these numbers are hugely significant. And I do believe that the term Lakpati Didis is something that this government continues to focus on and has looked to support through the loans and the programs that are given through various routes. I would just maybe add a last point on the green energy front. There was specific mention of wind energy and the support for at least 1 gigawatt program therein. And again, mention on biomass, which has been a big focus for this government, and one which is going to obviously see continued focus given what we have just heard today. E-vehicles and e-charging stations, e-buses, again got mentioned. So support for that green infrastructure in terms of e-mobility also appears to be high in focus. Startups, I think, Subhatam, do you want to just mention on startups? Yeah. So startups, again, there's a mention on 2 fronts. One is in existing programs, of course, continuing, but sunset clauses which were coming in have been extended by a year. So we do see some continuity there. And the R&D fund, which has been announced, is a very big one, a large corpus with youth mentioned therein, sunrise sectors mentioned therein, 50-year loans, interest-free. This is significant in terms of access to credit and funding, where we have traditionally relied so much on foreign venture capital, foreign funding, to now have domestic access to this kind of money would be highly useful in terms of supporting what has been a very successful startup system in the country.
Do we take a couple of questions? And
so if there are a couple of questions, we'll take that, but we have a shortage of time, we just limited to 3 or 4 questions. Any questions? Yeah, please.
FICCI and other industry associations.
absolutely, yes. Certainly on behalf of FICCI, I can say that we welcome the directionality of the budget and the clarity of thought, as well as perhaps most importantly, the commitment to the fiscal glide path. So, fiscal profligacy is not what is at play here. There is a clear attempt at keep running a tight ship, even as the focus is on growth and various constituencies.
It's away from the election, what people were expecting is going to be with the election in mind. It's away from there. Thank you.
Yeah.
The only mention was on services. So to make there was of course emphasis on the ease process, but also the waiver of past demands of a small nature. But so really, I don't think we were expecting much on the tax front because this is an interim budget. So let's just wait for the main budget. I don't think it's being ignored. It's just that this was not the right budget to do it.
So as the finance minister mentioned, I think in keeping it with convention, there is no tax proposals, either direct or indirect. But I think, again, in terms of directionality, there has been a clear sort of thrust towards, I suppose, in some ways, encouraging people to move towards the new tax regime, which is cleaner and more simpler. But again, and what further steps are there, I suppose, will be visible in the full budget for the year, which will be later on.
And I think at the personal level, what has been mentioned is continued focus on affordable housing. And there was mention of middle class housing scheme. So let's just see if that's specified in the details as we analyze.
Yeah.
So, clearly, I think in as much as, India's growth trajectory is concerned, technology has a significant role to play because it is through investments in digital public infrastructure, for example, that we have been able to leapfrog some of the traditional constraints. And I think, again, the finance minister in her speech highlighted that there is a focus on investment in all types of infrastructure, whether it is physical, digital, or social. So in that context, as I said again, I think technology has a big role to play and investments thereof, and the measures and various schemes taken by the government to encourage adoption of technology. It's not just this interim budget, but in previous budgets that there have been significant outlays and specific mention of it. So yes, I think again, if you look at the demographic dividend which is there before India, which being the youngest nation in the world, not just the most populous, but the youngest nation, I think it is important to encourage the youth to adopt technology and look at how that can be a game changer as it has been in many fields.
And there was support and mention of new institutes of technology and also STEM programs and women's presence therein. So the focus on education and continuing to create a focus around STEM education in particular, I think feeds into that tech environment that you're asking about.
Next question, please.
I think
I
in
think
that
that's-
There has also been an increase in the outlay for infrastructure sector. Would you also like to add something to that?
So, clearly, I think we have said it repeatedly that the government has done a brilliant job of doing the heavy lifting at a time when the economy needed it the most. And you had a 10 lakh crore outlay in the last budget, which was instrumental in imparting momentum to the Indian economy. And that has been bettered now with a sort of a indication of a 11.1% increase to 11.11 lakh crores. So that is very significant. But what is also important to note here is the confidence that the government is reposing in the private sector, recognizing that the private sector is now stepping up to the plate and investing itself. So I think helped by buoyant revenue streams, the government is now also looking at taking a step back in terms of borrowings, and that will open up space for the private sector to borrow money to fund its own expansion plans. So what was up till now predominantly, I think, government-led capex, now we are seeing private sector come on board, which is I think very important and necessary.
And I think we also expect the public sector capex programs to see an increase, given that we do have very large public sector companies in there. So yes, industry-wide capex to go up would be, in fact, something we should absolutely be looking forward to.
Thank you very much.